A lot of people talk about Class D amplifiers being bright and not as balanced as Class A or AB. To understand this, we need to go into some basic explanations about the common types of power amps. So Class A are a type where the current is always on regardless of the musical signal. You tend to find a warm sound and higher power consumption because the current is always being converted to heat. With Class AB, on the other hand, the power is reduced where there is no signal, but as the signal demands it, power consumption is increased to meet the dynamics and the demands of the music. With Class D, the amp is creating pulses relative to the original signal rather than being on all the time. This makes them very efficient, little heat, but you get high frequency noise created by these pulses, and this has to be put into an electrical filter to deal with it. NC500 Dual Mono Mark II is a stereo power amplifier to be used with a preamplifier that uses Hypex power amp modules and power supplies, which are commercially available from this Dutch company. It's got a really nice thick case with thick sheet aluminium, not the usual cheap wraparound ply thickness aluminium. In a stereo power amp, the left and right channels are on the same circuit and not separated. But in a true dual mono design, these channels are separated discretely from one another. You can specify different devices called op amps, which are basically the final part of the chain before music is sent to your speakers, and obviously these are going to have an effect upon the sonic characteristics of the amp. In this review sample I have the Sonic Imagery 990 ENH op amps, which is an additional £45 option. So you'll find standard 4mm binding posts for connection to speakers. You want to use either 4mm Z plugs or normal 4mm plugs. There are XLR balanced inputs, which are a type of connection between pre and power amps, where instead of using two conductors you have an additional one to eliminate noise across the length of the cable. There is a simple IEC connection to the mains and an on-off switch. You can also spec this Nord with trigger inputs, which use a 3.5mm input of the type you find on headphones to turn on this power amplifier with your preamplifier. Obviously the preamp needs to have a 3.5mm trigger output. You get a dimming switch on the back for the front panel, on indicator light and button. 3 positions, fully on, dimmed or off. You can also spec this Nord with RCA input connections as an optional extra too. Conventional wisdom would be to be very careful with it when using speakers that are rated much lower. In other words, don't max it out on your speakers and be cautious.
And now for something completely different.
So normally when I review a product, I have to highlight the positives in the product for two reasons. Performance can be quite similar, and secondly, taste can be different. But if performance is similar, and I think a lot of people will think so, and it represents better value for money, then I have to call it out. Compared to my Class AB Cyrus mono power amps, this Nord is not quite as warm sounding in tone or as emotionally tugging on warm heartstrings, but what it does have is more detail and micro detail projection. A Vangelis track that I have called Ask the Mountains, you hear more of the cricket noises and insect noises at the start than I'd heard before using my Cyrus monos. Listen out. I'd have to say that this slightly reduced warmth is probably more a case of the characteristics of the Cyrus preamp I'm using, because it's slightly voiced on the side of treble and not neutrality. When I tried this Nord power amplifier with a M2 Tech Young Mark III preamp DAC, it was a little bit more rounded. So what this is telling me is that this amplifier is very reflective of the source preamp and DAC that it's fed. So match this something warmer or more neutral and it works extremely well. I have to say that it didn't diverge too much from the trademark Cyrus sound when I was using my Cyrus DAC XP Signature preamp. So what I would say is, having mentioned all this, it does somewhat dispel the notion that Class D can be bright or sharp, because it really depends upon what you use it with. I'd have to say that I don't think you can characterise it as being as smooth as Class A or Class AB when it's done really well, but what you have to bear in mind is the overall picture you're looking at, and by that I mean the overall sonic traits. I've had before the Cyrus X Power mono power amps, and for similar money this would be a significant upgrade on those amplifiers. Colin mentions that this amplifier performs similarly to a Bel Canto Reference 600M, which uses similar HiPex power amp modules and at less than half the price, and considering my tests, I'm not surprised. I said you have to look at the overall picture, because compared to these Cyrus mono amplifiers I'm used to, it's performing better in areas like dynamics, detail, bass punch, and at half the price. It's also a little bit more fluid, and these qualities are perhaps not surprising when you consider there is much more power on tap here. But what I would say is it's significantly better value than the Cyrus Mono X200 signature power amplifiers that I have, and if you have similar well-known amplifiers you might find the same thing. So if you want more power than Kim Jong-un, detail and dynamics, and a sound to match what your preamp is already doing at a fraction of the price of more well-known alternatives, I don't think you'd beat this. For the money, it's very appealing, and it makes me wonder why we pay more when there isn't really any need to. So in conclusion, it easily reaches the 13th note, and this amplifier will be one I will refer people to for value for money, unless something comes along that's better, which I very much doubt.